Hello, my name is Carl Council, and today I'll be discussing Laura Bahana's article, Shakespeare in the Bush. My presentation focuses on how worldview influences the way we interpret communication, behavior, and even stories that may seem universal. Bahana's experience with the Tiv people demonstrates that two groups can hear the exact same story but understand its meaning completely different because of the cultural backgrounds. I'll also connect her experience to ethnocentrism, communication across cultures, and one of my own experiences in South Korea. To understand that lesson, I'll start with a brief overview of Bahana's experience. Bahana traveled to West Africa and spent time with the Tel people. She brought Shakespeare's Hamlet with her and believed the basic meaning of the story would be universally understood. However, when she actually told the story to the Tiv elders, she quickly discovered that they interpreted many of its events differently. Their beliefs about family, leadership, death, spirits, marriage, and responsibility shaped how they understood the characters and their actions. What stood out to me is that the problem wasn't simply translation. They understood the story, but they interpreted its meaning through their own cultural worldview. And that becomes even clearer when we compare Bahana's interpretations of Hamlet with the Tiv interpretation. This slide shows some of the strongest examples. Bahana understood Hamlet's father as a ghost, but the Tiv try to understand the figure through concepts familiar to them, such as an omen or witchcraft. The remarriage of Hamlet's mother also produced a completely different reaction. What Hamlet viewed negatively made sense within the Tiv understanding of family responsibility. Even Hamlet's behavior and his delay in seeking revenge were interpreted according to Tiv beliefs about witchcraft, elders, and proper social behavior. Neither group was simply looking at facts without cultural influence. Both sides were applying their own beliefs to make the story logical. The realization leads directly into one of the most important concepts in intercultural communication, ethnocentrism. At the beginning, Bahana showed an ethnocentric bias because she assumed her Western interpretation of Hamlet was basically universal. She expected the Tiv elders to reach many of the same conclusions she did. Instead, they challenged that assumption repeatedly. What seemed obvious to Bahana did not necessarily seem obvious to them. This is what makes the article so effective. Bahana eventually realizes that her culture is not automatically the standard by which every other culture should be understood. Different cultural norms can produce different interpretations without one culture automatically being superior. We can see the same issue when we look at behaviors within our own culture that we consider completely normal. One example from American culture is direct communication. We often value getting straight to the point. Someone might say, just tell me the truth, and view that directness as honesty and efficiency. But another culture may interpret that exact communication style as rude, confrontational, or disrespectful. In cultures where maintaining harmony or preserving someone's dignity is especially important, indirect communication may actually demonstrate greater respect. So, something that feels completely normal to us can feel uncomfortable to someone operating from another worldview. That raises an important question. What should we actually do when those different worldviews collide? My answer is that we should pause, Listen, ask questions, seek understanding, and then adapt our communication. A major lesson from Bahana's experience is that effective intercultural communication requires curiosity instead of immediate judgment. Rather than assuming someone misunderstood us, we should first consider whether they are interpreting the situation through a different cultural framework. So, the question I would ask is, what should we do when our worldview clashes with someone else's? My answer is pause, listen, ask questions, and seek to understand before judging. Once we understand the other person's perspective, we can adjust how we communicate without necessarily abandoning our own values. This lesson connects closely with something I personally experienced while living in South Korea. Living in South Korea has given me firsthand experience with differences in communication styles. Coming from an American background, I was accustomed to relatively direct communication. At times, when someone communicated indirectly or remained quiet instead of immediately expressing disagreement, I could initially interpret that silence as disagreement or lack of interest. Over time, I learned that silence can communicate thoughtfulness, respect, or a desire to preserve harmony. That experience reminds me of Bahana. She initially interpreted the TIV response through her own cultural lens, just as I initially interpreted certain interactions here through mine. Understanding the cultural context changed my perception. And that brings me to the biggest lesson I took away from the article. The most significant lesson I gained from Shakespeare in the Bush is simple. Different does not mean wrong. Our worldview influences what we consider normal, logical, respectful, or appropriate. Bahana entered the experience believing that Hamlet had essentially one universal meaning, but the Tiv elders demonstrated how dramatically culture can influence interpretation. For me, effective intercultural communication requires humility, empathy, and a willingness to see a situation through someone else's cultural lens. Understanding another worldview doesn't require us to abandon our own, it simply makes us better communicators. I'll close with the source that guided this presentation. The primary source for this presentation was Laura Bahana's Shakespeare in the Bush, along with the concepts and materials covered from GCU's class Com 263. The references and citations are presented here in APA format. If you have any questions, please reach out to me via the chat. Thank you for your time and thank you for listening. This concludes my presentation.